Thank you. Okay, we're reconvening the Committee of the Whole meeting for July 2nd, 2025. We're continuing breakdown of the list of 55, 56. We kind of knocked out what admin thought were maybe the most pressing questions for the board. You guys have what you need now to move them through the committee process and get approvals from the board, right? You're good on the ones we talked about?
Yes, I'm assuming you'll want MOEs on some of those things to come forward at the next meeting.
Okay,
Yes.
cool. And some we already have, like the Andover Bridge is already in the works, but,
That still needs a decision made on it, though,
you mean in committee?
in committee, because what Tom's bringing forward is just the project, it's not the funding.
You're talking about the funding piece? Okay. I think if admin comes to us with a recommendation on funding in conjunction with DPW, the board will support your recommendation. It's my best guess. Is that good enough? Okay. All right, so with all that said, and because I think it probably is the most, not only the largest, but also the most pressing question is what the board wants to do. And I'm not trying to steal conversation from other committees, but really this is all circling back to the DPW shop and how and when to fund it. So I don't think we need to rehash why Mr. Windus considers this to be a pressing issue. But it is related to the change in code, right, state code. In order to get rolling on this with a facility we want, with the type of infrastructure we want, we need to make a decision on it. My apprehension, which I've expressed before, is that I think in a perfect world, the board would want one of the other bond payments to fall off before we considered entering into another bond. That's just good, I think good, makes fiscal sense. The question is whether or not, I don't want to say the board believes it, whether or not the board prioritizes that concern coming out of DPW over what would be more probably fiscally appropriate, which would be to wait on a project like this until one of the bond payments falls off. So can I hear the board's preferences in that regard? Mr. Demick.
I guess my question would be, do we actually wait to move forward until we can establish a new bond, or do we move forward as we probably should with everything we've got put together? And Terry could probably answer this better than anybody, and do a BAN until the bond comes open, if we can afford to do that, I guess would be the question.
All right, so I'll tag on to that question. The ban, here's a couple questions. Is it faster to turn around and get a ban established in a, as opposed to a full-on bond? Will the payments for the ban be about the same amount? I don't really care about penalty or interest versus principal, that kind of stuff. Will the payment be similar to a bond payment? I guess if you could start with those questions.
First off, I would never recommend going out for a bond right off the bat. You would always want to do short-term borrowing first before you do long-term borrowing, because then you're only borrowing what was actually spent and not an estimate. So I would not recommend going out for a bond for an estimate. What you would do is you would ban that. So you would short-term borrow first. Short-term borrowing requires you to pay interest only for the first several years of a ban before you long-term turned it into a bond, which would then have a scheduled payment for every year for 30 years.
The bond
So the bond
assumes
is,
all of what's remaining on the ban.
correct.
Okay.
The bond is where you end up borrowing absolutely everything that you spent. Okay? So the ban gets you there, and you borrow an estimate. Okay? So if you borrow $33 million and it costs you $34 million, then you decide, okay, what are you gonna do with that? And we're gonna long-term bond the difference. But you're along the way, you're short-term borrowing and you're paying interest only, which helps. I mean, that's not a bad, that's how we've done other ones. We've done them both ways. The preferred way is the ban. So that can extend it and your payments are lower until you borrow the whole amount by a bond.
Do you go out with the band, do you go out for what you're estimating the full cost to be? Or you just get yourself rolling with a smaller amount?
No.
You go
Because
full
it
amount.
all costs money. So if you were to multi-ban a project, which you could do that, it all costs money. It costs about $25,000 to $40,000 every time you go out to borrow money. And that's part of the cost. I mean, it's not, we all know that. So you would borrow, you could borrow half of it, you could borrow a quarter of it, you could borrow whatever. I have not seen the cash flow of this project, so I'm not sure how that construction phase would go how much money you'd need at a certain point in time in the project. I have not seen that yet. In fact, I don't think we've even gotten that yet. So once we get that, we have a better idea of the cash flow of the project. But you would go out, you'd get a rate locked in, you have to do absolutely everything the same that you would for a bond, though. It requires an official statement, it requires, all the rating process, it requires all of that. So then you borrow it, you pay the interest, you would have to budget the interest for the upcoming years of however many years. And then, once you long-termed it, then that sets and we do level payments. It just makes budgeting easier. So for like the jail, our level payments were based on $1.6 million. They range from $1.5 to $1.6 million. Level across the 30 years. It's easy to budget that way. You know what you're looking at. I would assume we would do the same thing with this one.
How far do we have to go down the road from a design and construction standpoint to satisfy beating that state regulation on gas, natural gas?
Yeah, that was one of the questions that we had, was how far do we have to be in it to say we're grandfathered to avoid anything that does come out? I know Allison has been trying to research that, and myself, we're trying to figure out where that would lie.
So what Hunt's determination is that we have this year to get the permit. Once you get the permit, it locks you into the current code. So we go through that process, get the permit, but the permit's only good for 6 months, 12 months, and we're trying to get that from Dave. But my understanding, it's about you have to start construction within that time frame. So the permit is the big thing to keep us locked into natural gas.
So have we already given approval to get the permit?
Correct. The committee did.
So yet to go to the full board?
No, I think it comes on this audit.
Correct. It was in the prepay, wasn't
Yeah,
it?
we prepaid that last Friday. So they got the check for the permit, and that's on its way, I believe.
So when they issue, which you would expect to be in the next month,
Yes. He said
that
about 4 or
starts
5
the 6-month clock to start construction.
That's correct.
Can construction be just being out there with a bulldozer pushing dirt around?
You have to start construction, whatever that is. So, but yeah, once you begin construction and continue it through, you're under the old code. So it's a matter of if that permit does not get acted upon, then you have to resubmit, and whatever code is in precedence at that point, or in law, is what you have to go by.
And Terry, what's your reasonable expectation from starting work on ban to having everything approved, ready to go to start receiving the money and being able to pay for construction?
Minimum of 2 months, if not a little longer. Depends on the time frame when it hits, how much, we have. And it'll depend on the time frame of bond counsel and fiscal advisors.
So is nobody asking?
They're aware of it, though. I mean, they're aware that we made them aware last year when we put that initial pre-bond on, or pre-ban on.
And nobody's asking whether it's DPW or Treasurer's Office or anybody on the board for the board to start using local dollars outside of a ban or a bond to start construction on this project? That's not, nobody's considering that, other than little things like the permit and stuff like that?
We have $1 million in that project already that you guys authorized, that we put $1 million in, which is what has been paying for Hunt. So we've got some of those preliminary costs already budgeted. That we also have on, by board resolution, you passed a resolution for $8 million, up to $8 million that we could borrow for preliminary, so we could capture those costs if we had to borrow for them. But we did put $1 million of our own money in there to start the project.
Are you
With
going to need
Hunt.
another approval to go out for the ban? Or is that what that $8 million?
I will need another resolution to go out for the entire thing once we get the bids back.
Okay, have you bid it?
No, the plan was to get the permit in case there's any changes, and then go out for bid.
And you
So,
need a separate approval to go out for bid?
that was part of the agreement. We already got approval for that.
Okay, that
So-
was part of the permit thing?
Yes.
So issue the permit, go out to bid.
Correct.
Okay, so what's the timetable on the bid process?
So the plan would be within 5-6 weeks, we would get the permit. If there's any changes, Hunt would have the few weeks to make those changes to the plan specs, then put them out for bid. We're figuring a minimum 5 weeks out on the street for them, for people to digest it and put bids in. So 3 months from now, we would have,
So
Bid
that's,
numbers.
that's already run through 2 months of the building permit time is run out?
so no, we've just started that. The building, so basically it went out yesterday. Yeah, the building permit actually went out yesterday, so that starts the clock on the 5-week. So, the application. So once, he has like 4 or 5 weeks to review it, is what he told us. It might take longer. There's a lot of plans, a lot of specs. So, once he does his review, if there's any changes, we make those changes, then he issues the permit. So we're looking at about 5-6 weeks before we actually get a permit in hand.
And then you go out to
And
bid?
then we go out to bid.
And then that's
So that
another
starts another 5,
5
6
weeks.
weeks. Yeah.
And then you need to award it before we go out for the ban? We got to get through that.
It's right in that same, process, because it's 45 days. Typically, in a bid process, your bids are good for 45 days. You have to
Okay.
act on them.
All right, and then so once you've got the award, then you go out for the ban, and then the clock continues on the building permit. We get the ban, then we can start construction. All of that stuff can work within 6 months of the receipt of the building permit?
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
Well, and the permit, like Tom said, is between 6 and 12 months. We're not
Right.
really sure what
And
the,
actually, Dean just found, Dave said it's good for 2 years.
So
the
it's
permit.
2
So we
years
have
out,
time, once we have that permit. So
Okay.
it locks us into the existing code,
Okay.
so.
All right,
So
that's good.
really, I guess to get to the point is, we need to make a straw vote, a decision, how quickly we want to move it forward, because if we get the permit and you all say, let's wait for a time period before we bid, because the clock, really, once you get the bids, that 45 days, you either accept them or reject them. So, that can now be delayed a little bit, but, we just want to make sure we're all on the same page, because if we're saying 3 years, that's a big difference.
Yep. Okay. So it sounds like what we need to do as a board is decide, do we want to go ahead with this? With the understanding that as soon as we take out that bond anticipation note, we'll be on the hook for, are we just guesstimating $1.5 to $2 million for the ban? Or is it less than that because it's just interest?
the ban payment will be less than that.
Okay.
But when you're ultimately looking at the bond, you're talking $33 million minimum, I guess we could say. Maybe maximum, we just don't really know yet. But if that's the case, the last bond we had was $24 million, and it was $1.6 million, and it was 2006.
Yeah, so it'll be over
So,
two.
it will definitely be over two. My estimate would be it would be 2.5.
Okay, but that's the bond payment. So the ban, which would be,
Ban would stretch you to the bond.
yep,
So the band could be $1 million, let's
Yep.
just say.
And the board
Of
needs to
interest
decide, do we
only.
want to go down this road now? Which
Yeah.
is, if we do this, it's not budgeted for 25, and we'll need to budget for 26 to cover however long they expect the ban to last before we go to the bond. How much, if that's, we're looking at between $1 and $2.5 million annually needs to be budgeted. Does the board want to do that now? That's the question. Knowing that it's going to have to come out of fund balance, knowing what we know now from way back 2.5 hours ago, when Terry described what our fund balance health was. Mike?
Thank you, Chairman. Unfortunately, this is actually a necessity, and I think it's something that we have to do. The cost is only going to go up. So our expenses on the project itself will only go up. Whereas, as I understand, the band and bonds both, if the interest rates out there could actually go down, Madam Treasurer, and and also in the future, we could refinance those bonds at a better interest rate too, if there was one out there. Is that correct?
Right, the process that we've been following all along is the short-term, long-term, and then after 5 years, you can look at refunding, and we have done that regularly, and that has saved us millions of dollars every time that we go out and refund those. The interest rate will be kind of volatile. You never know how the market's going to be when we actually go out to ban or bond. You're going to have that interest rate. But, you know, we are in good financial, shape. So, I mean, I don't anticipate there's any issues of getting a good rate. How good of a rate, I don't know.
So, as long as we keep our bond rating positive,
Correct.
That'll put us in a good position even in ongoing years to
Correct.
take best advantage of that, right?
Correct.
Thank you.
John?
Terry, if we ban the 33 million, and then in year one, we only spend 5 million, do we pay interest on the 5 million, or is it the 33?
Pay interest on the 33. Because you get all of that up front.
Jan?
Well, I have some concerns. I agree, it's a project that needs to be done. My concern is that we're going to have to start saying no to some other projects then. I just don't see how we can continue to do all these other things that aren't budgeted and continue to pull from fund balance. And I think that we need to start really looking at some of the other projects on this list and say, no, we can't do them, or at least we can't do them now. I just don't think we can continue to say yes to everything.
Well, if you don't deal with them one-on-one, if they're still there, you don't have, you have to make a decision someday, but if you don't do anything with them, we've got them on here. They've been on, some of them been on there for years. We haven't done anything, so I don't think there's a big need to address one by one to whether we're going to do it or not do it right now. If we have a project that we want to do, yeah, that's, you can address it, but the rest of them are just there. They've been there, so.
All right. Anyone have any significant opposition to, beyond concern, we're all concerned, significant opposition to getting the ball rolling on this shop? No? Okay, so admin heard that. We're ready to move forward. So whatever, County Treasurer, you need to do to get board approvals to start working on that ban process.
Well, and I would not come forward with that until we had a number.
Right.
So
right,
that
right,
will be
right.
months.
Right,
So,
right.
yep, okay.
So.
But we'll be ready.
At this point, the board has done everything it needs to do, I think. You've got the approval to go out to bid, so it's not our fault. All right, so with that being said, let's just make sure that I've got my story straight here. Now that you guys are getting into 26 budget building, you're going to make an estimate of band interest costs and apply that to the budget, probably through an increase in allocation of fund balance for '26?
My guess is that we won't see any interest payment in '26. Because it will probably be due in '27. But we will verify that. And like I said, fiscal advisors, we've already contacted them about potentially borrowing the money, so we've got them on track. I'll send them an email today or tomorrow saying that, it looks like we're gonna go through this. It'll be an estimate, what can you give us for estimates on that? So I'll know more after I do that, but they are it's on the radar for them.
All right, can I make this conversation even more complicated and say, should the board be considering folding any other big projects into a bond? So I'm thinking third floor renovation or, real estate acquisitions or demolitions or purchase, whatever. Is that something we need to be considering now before we go any further?
I would say if you have big projects on your plate, that, some of these and some of something else, or if you have some other project that you have thought about, and you should discuss all that. They're small enough that you can pay for out of fund balance, that's one thing, but if they're not, then, that's why some of these are on there, because you've got facilities on here that you've talked about that you don't know, you've got employment and training looming, you've got some of those other things looming that, maybe you need to look at all of that, and you do have time, because the bids won't be in, so you do have time to look at those other things that you might want to consider, but, I don't,
Mr. Chairman?
it just makes the payment higher.
I agree 100% with that. I think when we first started talking about this, that was part of our game plan, what there was going to be other projects that may want to be into this bond altogether. So I agree with that. I think we should absolutely look at that if there's things to purchase. Otherwise, we may fall into budget constraints to where some of the things we need to do, we're not going to be able to do, so. Thanks.
I'm not thinking of anything other than like big repairs and improvements like down at the jail or not necessarily Crossroads, but other potential real estate transactions that would be followed up by major renovations. Like maybe we'll need a significant renovation at Crossroads. Maybe we purchase another property that will require significant renovations. Maybe we'll need a new construction, whether it's employment and training or emergency services. Where would you want that to fall in terms of getting that discussion going between now and when we go out for bond? Space needs? I can't think of anything significant outside of that realm that would fit. So I don't know if Mr. Demick's up for taking that on or not.
No, I agree with that 100%. I think we got some things we do need to discuss. We may even throw some of them out this afternoon. But absolutely, I think it's worth the conversation.
All right. So we'll start adding that to Space Needs agenda, maybe?
And on our end, just to get you prepared for that, is obviously that's gonna cost money. So, we'll have to get some estimates of what those payments would be, because you won't be able to afford all that. But, and in my opinion, you won't be able to afford all that, because you'll dip into what you have to make those payments that will stop you from doing some of these other things. So you really need to watch how you balance that. It's a balancing game, so.
Thank you. All right. Is that enough of the list for today? I don't mean to give a long lunch, but Mr. Healy?
I just was wondering, I think Terry wrote it down there about the pilots. We can get the status of the pilots there too. Thank you.
Well, and just to keep going, I guess, a little bit, not to belabor the whole thing, I think there are things on here that you guys should look at to decide if you want to cross them off. crossing off things might be easier as we go into the future budgets, that you have no desire to do anything more with that, or you have a desire to continue doing that. And you might want to look at this list to have any cross-offs. Also, if there's things on there that are add-ons, we will want to know them as well, just to keep them on the radar. We are going into the budget season. We have not distributed any information to the departments at this point in time. The timetable, we have some meetings to come up with the timetable and how we're going to do that in this next few days. So we'll have more things to report back at budget. But there's a lot to consider, I think, and we really didn't talk about that potential lawsuit settlement as well. So I don't know if you want to go in for a little minute.
Yeah, sure.
To talk about that.
Well, Terry, just before you do, I just wanted to point out that things like the lawsuit on this list, not all of them are projects. Some of them are just budget concerns. As we look at people's budgets, they're growing. They might be all claim-based that we've noted, oh, this is bigger than it has been in previous years with a question mark on it. So don't think all these are just projects, although most are.
Are you talking about the Revell lawsuit? Okay. All right. So if there's nothing else on any of this, yeah, Jan?
I just want to go back to one thing that's going to probably cost us money that really we should be addressing. There's a facility or location for employment and training, and we really haven't talked about it a lot. And I know you'll probably address it in space needs, but I think something needs to move forward on that. Rita's been very patient, and I think that it's going to cost money, and that's one of the things that we're going to have to look at. And what do we do? How much is it going to cost? Where are we going to put them?
All right. So probably won't, yes.
If you want to talk on that lawsuit, although, there's a lawsuit out there that's public knowledge, if you want any legal opinion, you probably want to go on attorney-client. I just want to
Will
put
do.
that out there.
Is there anything else, so we can just end the feed now when we go into attorney-client and not come back live knowing that this is our last discussion topic? Anything? Okay, so we won't go live
Brooke,
stream again. Yes?
If we can do a good of the order thing
Yeah,
now.
yep.
This Saturday, there's two great things going on in Allegheny County, one in Angelica, the Lavender Festival, and then over in Canandaigua, Houghton, the Seneca Canandaigua Field Day. There's plenty of time in the day to cover both, and there's a beautiful new bridge that makes the trip between the two a little shorter, so you could enjoy looking at that also. But both events are this Saturday, and we welcome you at both.
Thank you.
I will be at the Lavender Festival all day, so if you want to meet me there.
He's a good salesman. Okay, with no other